Hello, Denise. Of course, as you know, I'm Glaire Anderson in case we need to have this information. And why don't you start, Denise, by introducing yourself, and then we'll move into the questions.
So I'm Deniz, and I studied art history and history at the University of Edinburgh for my undergraduate degree, and then I went to do a art history master's by research, again at the university. And during my undergraduate, I focused mostly on internet art and memes as an art form, so mostly digital things. But in my master's, I focused on late Ottoman painting and photography, focusing especially on women's history. So I just did both digital and traditional art forms. And after I graduated from my master's, I started working at the digital lab with Glaire. And I was very excited about the digital lab as it brings both the digital and the traditional together. So I thought that was the best place for me to work.
Wonderful. Well, that is a good introduction into the next question, which is what motivated you to work with me in the digital lab, first of all? So you've already said a little bit about that. Do you want to just add a little bit to that?
hmm So I completely agree with the values and the mission of the digital lab, which is making history, Islamic art history, and history in general and visual culture more accessible. And I believe that the digital is the way to go about that because most fields are catching up with the digital, but art history is still a bit behind, especially Islamic art history. But Glaire is doing very important work, and I just knew that I wanted to be involved in that. And I do think that we need to bring knowledge out of the academy, and the digital is the way to do that.
That's wonderful to hear. Thank you, Denise. Yeah, and I wonder too, I mean, it would be really nice, I think, to hear a little bit more about something that you mention in your introductory post on the Digital Lab social medias. But you mentioned your own background as someone who, was born and raised in Istanbul. And I wonder if you could say a little bit about how that, how does that inform your ideas about the digital as a way to make Islamic art and history more accessible to more people?
hmm I mean, I was lucky enough to be able to study abroad, but and learn more about my culture, really enough from people who are not from my own culture. History of art in Turkey is not a field that is very well funded, I will have to say. So a lot of people won't use it. And I think a lot of the teachers and lecturers in Turkey are still foreign people who have studied abroad. So I think there is definitely a lack of information still. And the way to bring more information, I believe, is the digital. I know the Turkish universities are getting more into that as well, but like I said, history and history of art are still quite underfunded. So I think what's important is that I was lucky enough to learn about it and I was lucky enough to get an education abroad, but most people are not. And I think it's very important that people from my own culture can bring information about our culture into the digital so that we can reach people from my country and other countries. And it just makes it more accessible and more international, I believe. And another thing I want to work on is to translate things into Turkish, which I think we've talked about too. And
Mm,
again, it's much easier to have information online nowadays.
mm. That's true. And in fact, now you've reminded me that that was one of the things we did when you were in my course on early Islamic
hmm
Iberia and North Africa. I think you translated some of our
Yeah.
texts that we were writing for some of the online resources. You
hmm
translated some of the texts on Cordoban ivories into Turkish, which I thought
hmm
was just fantastic. This is really, really important to hear your perspectives on that. All right, so that brings us to then not only your work in the digital lab, because you started working with me in the digital lab on Digital Munya 2.0
hmm
at the same time as our Unity developer, Dara Etefagi. And I brought you into the Digital Munya 2.0 project because of your background working with me already in my course on early Islamic
Mhm.
Al-Andalus. So that was very, very good preparation for the work that we then did on Digital Munya 2.0. But tell me about what motivated you to work with me then in my project with Ubisoft, because that was that was maybe a bit of a departure from what we what we normally expect to do in the academy.
Yeah, it was very different, but that was one of the reasons I wanted to do it because I have a lot of academic experience already through studying, but I didn't have that much industry experience at all. And I think it's very important to be able to have experience in an actual business because that's what I want to do. I want to bring knowledge out of academia, and that's why I've been working in the digital lab the whole time. And this was the project that would bring knowledge to more people than we could have ever hoped for with digital media, even though we have reached a lot. It's just on a scale that's completely different. And so I couldn't say no to that. And yeah, just working with Ubisoft is honestly a dream come true as well because I love video games. That was one of the reasons I was involved in the digital lab. And I just, from just the entertainment perspective, I love playing them. And I also believe they're works of art. But I also believe that they're incredible tools to spread information. So it was just so lucky that I can play part in spreading the right type of information to millions of people throughout the world. And especially Ubisoft. I wouldn't have worked for any game company because there's still a lot of issues in gaming, especially in the representation of the Middle East and Islamic cultures and Islamic characters. I mean, the most cases of that is that Muslims are represented as terrorists still in the gaming industry. So Ubisoft has always done something very different, paying respect to the actual cultures and the places they've been representing. So I knew I wanted to take part in that. And like I said, I am from Istanbul, and Assassin's Creed was the first time I saw Istanbul in a game represented respectfully. And it was very game changing. Before that, I genuinely thought games were just shooting people, and I didn't like that at all. But this has brought something very different to the industry and to academia, and it's just very incredible that they've allowed us to bring two spheres together. So yeah.
Very well said, and I couldn't agree with you more because when I first saw the first Assassin's Creed and saw that iconic view of Damascus in Assassin's Creed, and as we've talked about before, not very long after the events of September 11th, right?
Yeah.
And to see not only their classic phrase that appeared on the beginning of the game about, how the game was developed by a multicultural group of people of different belief systems and faiths and so forth, but then also to see one of the great cities of Islamic history and civilization represented in this incredibly visually compelling way. It just stopped me in my tracks. So I know what you mean about, and yes, that representation of Istanbul from Brotherhood, isn't it? Is it Brotherhood or Revelations?
Revelations.
From Revelations, yeah, is stunning. So I agree, and it's really nice to hear your perspective on that. Okay, so you have talked a little bit about this, but I'd like to ask you more about how the experience working in the digital lab and working specifically on the Ubisoft project, what effect has this experience had on your professional development or your ideas about where you'd like your career to go?
I mean, like I said, it gave me an opportunity to work in a business in a very high-paced environment as well, which is quite different to academia, where you take a very long time to write one article, whereas we were just thrown with different tasks constantly. And that was just a great way of just building more adaptability. I found out that I was always interested in the gaming industry, and I did think it would be very fast-paced and interesting, but I witnessed it firsthand. Things can change very fast. I think that's the case for every business, really. Academia is very different in that sense, that it's quite slow and slowly changing. But it was a great experience to just working on something and suddenly the next day you're working on something completely different. And I just think that's a very important skill, just being able to adapt to every different change and every different request, and just being able to work with people as well. And I mean, Digital Lab in general was great because it took me out of the quite lonely path of just research and made it into a more collaborative effort. But this was even in a larger scale, where I worked with people from very different backgrounds. So it just helped me become a better collaborator and better communicator. And yeah, like I said, better adaptability skills for sure. So it definitely helped me build a lot of skills that just studying doesn't allow you to develop as much. And even from an academic perspective, it helped me learn more too, because some of the topics I was looking into were not things I had necessarily come across while I was studying. So it just really expanded my academic knowledge as well, and my knowledge of just objects in art history and collections and museums around the world. So it has helped me both professionally and academically. And it's also, most importantly, made me realize that there is a lot you can do with academic knowledge, more than just academia. And it actually it made me want to do a PhD because one of my biggest issues, I love research and I want to learn more, and I have always wanted to do a PhD. But one of the main issues I had encountered was that, what if I do a PhD and then can do nothing with that knowledge that I've worked on for so long? But this made me realize that there is a lot you can actually do, and there's a lot of new opportunities that combines academic knowledge with industry and help you reach a much wider audience. So that's one of the reasons I actually did apply for a PhD, and I wanted to focus on video games on my PhD as well. So it definitely helped me understand what I can do with my knowledge and my skills.
I'm so glad to hear that because, yes, with the state of the academy and the state of, the job market in academia, which has been in crisis for decades, really. It's always been in crisis ever since I was a PhD student. So that's not new. But for sure, the world needs people who can read and research and think and write, and can do that with their full critical faculties. Because I think, as we have all seen over these last decades, the misinformation that is rife out there and that is perpetuated, unfortunately, in our various types of media and entertainment, sometimes inadvertently even. The more people we have who can bring those critical skills and bring sound, substantive knowledge to the information that people are receiving, the better, right? So I think, the more educated people who have skills in research and critical thinking and writing, the better. And it is really wonderful to know that those skills and those knowledge sets and skills and backgrounds and experiences can inform other areas. They don't have to be limited just to a scholarly audience or a university audience, even though obviously that's incredibly important too. In any case, there was one thing you said that I do want to draw out a little bit more, and that is on some of the new areas of information that working on this project helped you become familiar with. And one of the things that I think brought me, you, and Sarah together in a way was that all of us have an interest in women's history, and have worked on issues of gender and Islamic history and Islamic art history in one respect or another. And you, in your award-winning master's thesis, did that on the Ottoman female artist, of course, but you were able to expand your knowledge back into the medieval period. So I just wanted you to say a little bit more, because I know that this is something that you enjoyed.
Yeah, I was able to read a lot about caliphal women, and I was fascinated by what I found out. And during my master's, I focused on a lot of Orientalist stereotypes around women, and I focused on bettering the understanding of Ottoman women. But this gave me the opportunity to go all the way back to the Caliphal era, to the Abbasid women, and I learned so much. And I even found out that I actually had some Orientalist misconceptions in my head about Caliphal women. I definitely had no idea how different roles they could have played. I learned a lot about the Kahramanat, which is now one of my favorite things in the world, who were basically high-ranking administrative assistants in the caliphal palaces. And they were able to leave the palace, they had a really huge power in the palace, and they had really expansive knowledge of the outside world and power in the outside world as well. So even though I had worked so much on bettering the understanding of Ottoman women and how they weren't always like locked up in harems, I honestly had some misconceptions about Abbasid women in harems. I didn't really think that there was a character like that who freely walked in and out and who was female. So yeah, it just made me realize that there is so much misinformation even in more academically inclined minds, and it was just so fascinating to find out more. And yeah, it's definitely one of now my favorite facts about history in general.
No, I completely agree. Yes, that was a really wonderful discovery, because even though I had focused on caliphal women in the Umayyad court, that was a new bit of knowledge for me as well, and it was really exciting to find more information about women doing active things, right? Women
Yeah,
as active, powerful agents who were participating in their societies, and yes, not these passive, objectified creatures locked away
yeah,
in the
exactly.
harem. Excellent. All right. So last question. Anything else that you'd like to add for PhD students or early career scholars who are considering engaging with industry? Do you have any advice for them on how to start, or how to venture down this path?
Hmm. I mean, for me, I got quite lucky in meeting you because, to be honest, nobody else I had met was doing this kind of thing during my studies. So I don't know what advice exactly to give, but I mean, it would be to reach out to people, I would say, because there's a lot of people now in academia doing more engaging and more digital and more accessible things. Like there are a lot of initiatives, even just in Islamic art history, like ArcNet and Hamseen. So there are a lot of initiatives. So I guess it would be to read more about it, learn more about it, and reach out to people who are doing those things so that you can be involved. Because you might not be able to be as lucky as me and meet someone in your own department who's doing that. But those people are always wanting to collaborate and always wanting to engage more. So I think just reaching out to people and even reaching out to companies if you think that you can offer something, just reaching out to the gaming industry or any other industry you would work in, because I think what I've learned from you, Glaire, is that people like to hear from other people and want to have invitations to work together. I have been quite shy in my life where I don't go up to people and I just wait for them to offer me something. But I do think, especially in the industry, you have to be more proactive and approach people yourself. So, yeah, which is something I'm working on still, but I think I will get there and be able to just go up and talk to people and ask them what I can do for you.
Right. Well, that is excellent advice, Denise, and I'm glad to hear you encouraging people to do that. I myself am an introvert, so I know exactly what you mean, and it takes a lot of, oh, I really have to psych myself up before
Yeah.
I can really go and introduce myself or, knock on a door, even a virtual one, to say, hey, this is who I am, and
Mhm.
would you like to work together in some capacity? But this was a case where I felt like, yes, as with you, for me I wouldn't work with just any video game company or franchise either.
Mhm.
But Assassin's Creed, I have to put them in a different category for all the reasons that you've already articulated. It was important, I felt,
Mhm.
for me to overcome my own my own introversion and reach out to Ubisoft. But I do think that it is well worth doing, and
Mhm.
getting out and talking to people and meeting people is the way to start. So thank you very much for that advice, and thank you very much for the interview. It's so lovely to hear your perspectives, and of course to have worked with you in the digital lab and on the Ubisoft project.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time and thank you for allowing me to work with you throughout.
A pleasure.